The Alpha King looked down on the poor Omega until he learned she was the true heir to the throne. How could someone be treated as insignificant while carrying a destiny no one recognized? And what happens when the truth about a rightful heir can no longer stay hidden? If you enjoy emotional stories filled with fate, hidden secrets, and unforgettable twists, subscribe and turn on notifications for more. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, do you believe someone's true worth should be judged by their birth or by their character? Now, let the first moments of this remarkable journey unfold, where appearances are only the beginning of the story. The world has a dangerous habit of mistaking silence for weakness. Dawn spread slowly across the northern territories, painting the jagged mountain peaks in shades of gold, while the ancient towers of Ashen Crown Palace rose proudly above the mist. Long before the marketplace awakened, servants hurried across polished stone courtyards preparing for the annual ceremony of unity, the grand celebration where every noble family gathered beneath one roof to renew their loyalty to the Alpha King. Crimson banners bearing the royal wolf fluttered in the crisp spring breeze, musicians rehearsed beside marble fountains, and elegant carriages rolled through the palace gates one after another, carrying wealthy alphas, influential betas, and respected noble families from every corner of the kingdom. They arrived dressed in embroidered velvet, sparkling jewelry, and polished boots, eager to be seen by the court and perhaps earn the favor of the most powerful ruler in the land. Hidden among the endless line of arriving guests walked a young Omega named Emily Carter. Unlike everyone surrounding her, she wore a simple cream-colored dress carefully mended by her own hands, a faded blue shawl resting gently across her shoulders to shield her from the cool morning air. Her worn leather shoes had traveled countless miles over rocky forest paths before reaching the capital, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity that no expensive gown could imitate. Around her neck rested a small silver pendant shaped like an unfamiliar crest, something she had worn since childhood because it was the only keepsake left by the woman who had raised her. Emily had asked many times where the pendant came from, but the elderly woman had always answered with the same gentle smile. One day, when the time is right, someone else will recognize it before you do. That answer had never made sense to Emily, and eventually she stopped asking. Life had taught her that unanswered questions were often easier to carry than painful truths. She earned her living helping elderly villagers, tending gardens, delivering herbs, and teaching children who could not afford books. She owned very little, but kindness had somehow become her greatest wealth. As she entered the palace courtyard, conversations immediately shifted toward her. Curious glances quickly became quiet whispers. A pair of noble women exchanged amused smiles while pretending not to stare. Who invited an Omega dressed like that? One asked softly. Perhaps she lost her way on the road to the servant quarters, the other replied with a restrained laugh. Emily heard every word, yet her expression never changed. She simply lowered her eyes politely and continued walking, refusing to let strangers decide the value of her spirit. Across the courtyard, Nathan Ashford descended the palace staircase, surrounded by royal advisors and members of his elite guard. At 31 years old, the Alpha King possessed the calm confidence of someone who had carried a crown longer than most men carried responsibility. His tailored black ceremonial coat reflected the morning light against silver embroidery stitched across the collar, while every measured step reminded those around him why no one questioned his authority. The crowd instinctively parted as he approached, heads lowering in respect. Nathan acknowledged greetings with brief nods before his attention shifted toward the unfamiliar Omega standing near the fountain. His gaze lingered only for a moment. He noticed her simple clothing before anything else. He noticed the faded shawl instead of the kindness in her eyes. Without asking her name or wondering why she had come, he quietly turned toward one of his advisors.
Make
certain the ceremony remains reserved for invited families, he said in a calm voice. We cannot allow disorder to overshadow tradition. His advisor followed Nathan's gaze toward Emily and immediately understood the unspoken assumption. Before the man could take a single step in her direction, an elderly royal historian standing beneath the palace archway suddenly froze. His weathered eyes settled upon the small silver pendant resting against Emily's neck. The color slowly disappeared from his face as memories buried for more than 20 years stirred awake. He whispered only 4 trembling words beneath his breath. That crest cannot exist. The uneasy whisper from the elderly historian disappeared beneath the rising music as the royal ceremony officially began, and no one except the old man seemed to notice that his hands had started trembling. Emily Carter quietly stepped away from the crowded courtyard, believing the strange look in his eyes had been meant for someone else. She had never enjoyed standing in the center of attention. Life had taught her that the safest place for someone like her was wherever pride could not reach. Instead of joining the nobles gathering beneath the grand pavilion, she wandered toward the palace gardens, where blooming white lilies surrounded peaceful stone pathways and birds greeted the warming morning with cheerful songs. The noise of the celebration faded behind her, replaced by the gentle sound of flowing water from an ancient fountain hidden beneath towering oak trees. There she found a small boy sitting alone on a marble bench, rubbing his eyes as though trying very hard not to cry. His elegant clothing revealed he belonged to one of the noble families attending the ceremony, but at that moment he looked less like a young aristocrat and more like an ordinary child who had simply become overwhelmed. Emily knelt beside him with a warm smile. "Are you lost?" she asked softly. The boy nodded. "I cannot find my grandmother." Emily reached into the small cloth bag she carried and offered him a freshly baked honey biscuit she had packed before leaving her village. "Then we will wait together until she finds you." The child accepted it with grateful eyes, and within minutes he was smiling again, telling her excitedly about the wooden horse he hoped to receive for his birthday. Hidden behind a row of flowering hedges, Nathan Ashford happened to witness the quiet exchange while taking a brief walk away from the formal ceremony to escape another endless discussion about politics. He watched the unknown Omega speaking with remarkable patience, never realizing that the child belonged to one of the kingdom's wealthiest families. She expected nothing in return. She did not ask for recognition. She simply offered kindness as naturally as breathing. Before Nathan could think further about the scene before him, hurried footsteps echoed along the garden path. A richly dressed noblewoman rushed toward them with visible relief. "There you are, William," she exclaimed, embracing the boy tightly before turning toward Emily. For one brief moment gratitude softened her expression. Then her eyes drifted toward Emily's simple clothing, and the warmth immediately disappeared. "Thank you," she said politely but distantly, taking the child's hand. "Come along. You should not trouble strangers." Emily smiled gently. He was never any trouble. The noblewoman offered only a brief nod before leading the boy away. Nathan stepped from behind the hedges, his presence immediately commanding attention. Emily rose respectfully and lowered her head. "Your Majesty." Nathan studied her for a moment. "The child appears to trust you quickly." "Children usually know when someone is listening," Emily replied calmly. Nathan glanced toward the bustling palace beyond the gardens. "You do not seem interested in meeting important people today." Emily looked around at the flowers dancing in the breeze before answering. "Important people are usually surrounded by enough attention already." Nathan almost smiled, but years of discipline hid the reaction before it reached his face. "You speak confidently for someone with so little standing." Emily met his eyes without arrogance. Standing changes with circumstance. Character should not. For the first time that morning, Nathan found himself unable to dismiss her quite as easily as before. Yet old assumptions remained stronger than quiet curiosity. "Wisdom alone does not change the order of the kingdom," he said evenly. Emily nodded. "No, Your Majesty. But sometimes it changes the people who shape that order." Before Nathan could respond, the royal trumpets sounded across the palace grounds, signaling the beginning of the ceremonial procession. Emily offered a respectful bow and walked back toward the celebration without another word. Nathan watched her disappear into the crowd, unaware that beneath the shade of a nearby balcony, the elderly royal historian still stood silently observing the silver pendant resting against her neck, his mind racing through memories of forgotten royal records that had been sealed away decades before. The royal procession wound through the palace courtyard beneath rows of towering white banners, while noble families applauded each ceremonial step with polished smiles and carefully rehearsed respect. Emily Carter remained near the edge of the gathering, content to watch rather than be noticed. The bright afternoon sun reflected across marble columns and stained-glass windows, filling the palace grounds with warm colors that almost disguised the invisible lines separating wealth from poverty, status from humility, and privilege from quiet perseverance. As musicians performed an ancient royal hymn, servants carried ceremonial gifts toward the grand hall where each noble house would present symbolic offerings to the Alpha King. Emily noticed one elderly servant struggling beneath the weight of an elaborate silver chest. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. "May I help you?" she asked kindly. The old man looked startled before offering a grateful smile. Together they carefully carried the heavy chest across the courtyard. Several nobles noticed the scene immediately. "Look," one young lord whispered with a smirk. The poor Omega finally found work suited to her. Gentle laughter spread among the nearby guests. Emily heard it, just as she had heard every whisper since arriving at the palace. She simply continued helping the elderly servant until the chest rested safely inside the grand hall. The old man quietly squeezed her hand. "Thank you. Most people only see uniforms. Very few see people." Emily smiled softly. Everyone deserves to be seen. Unbeknownst to her, the elderly royal historian stood only a few yards away, watching every movement while his thoughts remained fixed upon the silver pendant resting against her neck. After decades serving the royal archives, he had memorized thousands of family crests, forgotten bloodlines, and ancient symbols. That pendant belonged to none of the current noble houses. It belonged to a dynasty officially erased from public history more than 20 years earlier. His heartbeat quickened. Impossible, he thought. Unless. Before he could finish the thought, another ceremony drew everyone's attention toward the center of the hall. One by one, noble representatives stepped forward to greet Nathan Ashford and renew their pledges of loyalty. Emily quietly moved toward the back of the chamber, hoping to remain unnoticed for the rest of the afternoon. But fate rarely respected careful plans. As she passed beneath an enormous stained-glass window, a young noblewoman intentionally stepped sideways, causing Emily's shoulder to brush lightly against a silver goblet resting on a nearby table. The cup tipped over, spilling only a small amount of juice across the polished stone floor. The hall instantly fell silent. "How careless," the noblewoman sighed dramatically. "Perhaps palace ceremonies are unfamiliar to villagers." Several guests chuckled. Emily immediately picked up the goblet and apologized to the attendants cleaning the floor. "I am sorry. I should have been more careful." Her calm response only seemed to disappoint those hoping for embarrassment. Nathan witnessed the exchange from the royal platform. For a brief moment, he considered stepping forward to end the uncomfortable scene. Instead, years of court tradition whispered the same lesson he had followed countless times before. Minor disputes among guests resolved themselves without royal intervention. Maintaining order mattered more than involving the throne in every disagreement. So he remained where he stood. Emily noticed his silence. She did not appear angry. She simply offered one final apology before quietly walking toward the palace balcony overlooking the gardens. The fresh spring breeze greeted her as she stepped outside, carrying the scent of blooming roses through the air. Behind her, the celebration continued as though nothing important had happened. Yet beneath the vaulted ceiling of the royal archives, the elderly historian hurried through towering shelves lined with forgotten scrolls and sealed records. His trembling hands finally uncovered an ancient leather-bound genealogy hidden inside a locked cabinet untouched for decades. As he slowly opened the fragile pages, one faded royal crest emerged beneath layers of dust. It was identical to the pendant worn by the quiet Omega everyone inside the palace had already decided was insignificant. The afternoon celebration reached its grandest moment as nobles, military commanders, and influential families gathered beneath the soaring ceiling of the Great Hall, where towering crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors. Musicians performed an ancient melody that had welcomed generations of rulers, while rows of royal banners framed the magnificent throne where Nathan Ashford received formal greetings from every distinguished guest. Emily Carter remained near the entrance beside several palace attendants, content to observe quietly before returning to her village once the ceremony concluded. She had no desire to stand among people who measured worth by titles instead of character. Across the hall, the elderly royal historian clutched the ancient genealogy against his chest with trembling hands. Every faded page confirmed what he had desperately hoped was impossible. The forgotten crest engraved upon Emily's pendant belonged to the House of Evermont, the original royal bloodline that had vanished from history after a mysterious palace tragedy more than 2 decades earlier. According to the official records, every surviving heir had been lost forever. Yet the final handwritten page told a different story. One infant daughter had escaped under the protection of a loyal guardian before the palace fell into chaos. Her name had never been recorded publicly to protect her identity. The historian looked toward Emily across the crowded hall, his heart pounding beneath his robes. Before he could approach the throne, another voice interrupted the ceremony. Lord Victor Hawthorne, one of the kingdom's most influential nobles, stepped forward with an elegant smile that rarely concealed genuine kindness. His sharp eyes settled upon Emily, as though he had only just noticed her presence. "Your Majesty," he began smoothly, "it is wonderful to see that today's celebration welcomes every citizen, regardless of humble circumstances." Several nobles smiled knowingly. Victor slowly turned toward Emily. "Young woman, perhaps someone should explain that the royal ceremony is reserved for families whose names actually belong in our history books." Quiet laughter rippled through the hall. Emily remained perfectly still. "I was invited to attend as a guest," she answered politely. Victor tilted his head with theatrical curiosity. "Then whoever invited you was remarkably generous." More laughter followed. Emily neither defended herself nor lowered her dignity. She simply folded her hands calmly before her. "Kindness is generous by nature." Victor's smile faded slightly. "A pleasant answer. Unfortunately, pleasant words do not create noble blood." The room grew noticeably quieter. Nathan heard every sentence from the royal platform. He recognized that Victor had crossed the line separating humor from unnecessary humiliation. Yet the court was filled with foreign ambassadors and powerful allies. Challenging one of his most influential nobles publicly could easily transform an awkward exchange into political conflict. Nathan remained silent, convincing himself that preserving stability served the greater good. Emily looked toward him for only a brief moment. Their eyes met across the vast hall. She found no cruelty in his expression, only restraint. Somehow that hurt more than open hostility ever could. Without speaking another word, she offered a graceful bow toward the throne. "Please excuse me, Your Majesty." Her voice remained calm, steady, and respectful. Then she quietly walked toward the towering palace doors while every noble watched her leave.
No tears, no anger, no bitterness.
Only quiet dignity. Moments after the doors closed behind her, the elderly historian finally stepped into the center of the hall holding the fragile genealogy with both hands. His voice echoed through the sudden silence. "Your Majesty, before this ceremony continues, there is something within these records that every person in this kingdom must see." Nathan slowly rose from the throne as the old scholar carefully opened the ancient book, revealing the faded royal crest that matched the silver pendant now disappearing beyond the palace gates. Silence settled over the great hall, with a weight no royal decree could command. Every conversation stopped as the elderly historian carried the ancient genealogy toward the center of the chamber, his careful hands treating the fragile leather volume as though it held the fate of the kingdom itself. Nathan Ashford descended from the royal platform, his expression calm but unmistakably serious. "Explain," he said quietly. The historian opened the weathered pages beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, revealing faded ink, royal seals, and a crest identical to the one engraved upon the silver pendant resting around Emily Carter's neck. Gasps spread through the hall. Several elderly nobles leaned forward, recognizing a symbol they had not seen since childhood. "This," the historian said, his voice echoing across the chamber, "is the crest of the House of Evermont, the original royal bloodline. 23 years ago, History recorded that every surviving heir disappeared during the palace crisis. That record was incomplete. Nathan frowned. Incomplete. The historian nodded slowly. The final guardian entrusted with protecting the youngest heir never reached the capital. Before dying, he entrusted the child to a woman living beyond the northern forests. The child's identity remained hidden, so no one seeking the throne could ever find her. Murmurs swept through the gathered court. Lord Victor Hawthorne folded his arms with visible disbelief. One forgotten document proves nothing. The historian calmly turned another page. Inside rested an official birth record, bearing the royal seal beside a handwritten account from the palace physician and the captain of the royal guard who had witnessed the infant's escape. Every signature matched authenticated records preserved within the royal archives. Nathan studied each page carefully before lifting his eyes. "Where is the pendant?" the historian answered without hesitation. "Around the neck of the young Omega who left this hall only moments ago." A heavy silence followed. Nathan replayed every conversation he had shared with Emily throughout the day. Her quiet confidence, her natural dignity, the unfamiliar wisdom that never sought recognition. Suddenly, countless small details no longer seemed ordinary. Lord Victor attempted one final objection. Even if the pendant belonged to that family, how can anyone prove the woman wearing it is truly connected? The historian gently reached into the back cover of the genealogy and removed a folded parchment that had remained hidden between two stitched layers for decades. Because the guardian described one final identifying mark known only to those protecting the child. He unfolded the parchment and read aloud. The infant princess wore the royal pendant around her neck from birth, and beneath her left collarbone rested a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon, the same mark carried by every direct descendant of House Evermont. Several elderly members of the court immediately exchanged astonished looks. They remembered the ancient stories passed quietly through previous generations. Nathan remained perfectly still. The pieces fit together with unsettling precision. Emily had never claimed importance. She had never demanded respect. She had never once attempted to use the pendant for personal gain. If anything, she seemed completely unaware of its significance. That realization struck Nathan more deeply than the revelation itself. She had spent her entire life earning admiration through kindness, while unknowingly carrying a legacy greater than anyone inside the palace had imagined. The Alpha King slowly closed the ancient genealogy with careful hands before looking toward the still-open palace doors where Emily had disappeared only minutes earlier. For the first time since ascending the throne, certainty abandoned him. He realized the quiet Omega he had dismissed as insignificant had never been seeking a place inside the kingdom. She had belonged to its history from the very beginning, and while the entire court had judged her by the simplicity of her clothing, the truth had been waiting patiently around her neck all along. Nathan Ashford left the Great Hall before anyone else could speak another word. The ancient genealogy remained tucked securely beneath his arm, but it no longer felt like an old collection of forgotten records. It felt like a mirror forcing him to confront every quiet judgment he had made throughout the day. The grand corridors of Ashen Crown Palace suddenly appeared unfamiliar as he replayed each encounter with Emily Carter. He remembered dismissing her because of a faded shawl. He remembered assuming she did not belong simply because she possessed no noble title anyone recognized. Most painfully, he remembered watching others belittle her while convincing himself that remaining silent preserved the peace of the court. Outside the palace gates, the spring afternoon had softened into a gentle golden evening. Nathan mounted his horse and rode toward the northern villages with only one trusted royal guard following several yards behind, instructing him not to announce the king's presence unless absolutely necessary. This journey was not about ceremony. It was about understanding someone he had never truly seen. The first village he reached overlooked a quiet lake surrounded by blooming wildflowers. As soon as he entered the square, several townspeople recognized the royal crest upon his traveling cloak and respectfully bowed. Nathan greeted them politely before asking a single question. "Have any of you met a young woman named Emily Carter?" An elderly baker smiled immediately. "Miss Emily? She helped repair my kitchen after last winter's storm damaged the roof." She worked beside my sons for 2 days and never accepted a single coin. Nathan blinked. She repaired your kitchen? The baker laughed warmly. She said hot bread feeds more than empty stomachs. It gives people hope. Nathan thanked him quietly before continuing his search. In the next village, he stopped beside a modest schoolhouse where children's laughter floated through open windows. The teacher welcomed him inside with visible surprise. Your Majesty. Nathan nodded respectfully. I am looking for Emily Carter. The teacher's face brightened. Every Saturday, she traveled 6 miles to teach reading here because many families could not afford books or tutors. She believed every child deserved the chance to dream beyond the life they were born into. Nathan slowly looked around the classroom. Every bookshelf had been built by local volunteers. Each book carried a handwritten note inside the cover encouraging children never to stop learning. Did she organize this? He asked softly. No, the teacher answered with a gentle smile. She inspired everyone else to organize it. As the journey continued, every village revealed another story Nathan had never imagined. A physician explained that Emily quietly delivered medicine to elderly patients unable to travel. A farmer described how she spent an entire harvest helping neighboring families gather crops after unexpected illness left them short-handed. A widowed mother remembered waking one winter morning to discover firewood stacked neatly outside her door with no note except 3 simple words carved into the top log. Keep believing always. No one praised Emily because of wealth. No one admired her because of bloodline. They loved her because she made ordinary people feel seen. By sunset, Nathan reached a peaceful hillside overlooking the valley where Emily had spent most of her life. Standing there alone beneath the warm evening sky, he finally understood the lesson every village had quietly taught him throughout the day. Long before anyone discovered she carried the blood of queens, Emily had already lived like one. Not through power, not through privilege, but through compassion so consistent that people remembered her kindness more clearly than they remembered their own hardships. Nathan lowered his eyes toward the ancient genealogy resting in his hands before whispering words meant only for himself.
The
throne did not make her worthy. I simply failed to recognize the worth she carried long before I ever met her. By the time Nathan Ashford returned to Ashen Crown Palace, the truth had traveled faster than any royal messenger. What had begun as quiet whispers inside the great hall had spread across villages, marketplaces, farms, and distant mountain settlements. People did not gather to debate whether Emily Carter carried royal blood. Instead, they shared stories of the woman they had already known long before anyone mentioned a forgotten throne. In the bustling market square outside the capital, merchants paused their work to speak about the young Omega who had once helped rebuild damaged stalls after a powerful storm without expecting payment. In the northern villages, parents reminded their children that Miss Emily had been the first person to bring books into classrooms that had none. Fishermen remembered her carrying warm meals to elderly neighbors during harsh winters. Shepherds smiled while recalling how she had spent an entire afternoon helping frightened children search for lost lambs before a heavy rain arrived. Every memory sounded different, yet every story carried the same quiet truth. Emily had earned people's hearts without ever asking for their loyalty. Inside the palace, the atmosphere had changed completely. Nobles who had laughed at her simple clothing only a day earlier now spoke with nervous caution. Some questioned whether the ancient genealogy could truly be authentic. Others privately wondered how they had failed to recognize the signs hidden in plain sight. Lord Victor Hawthorne walked the marble corridors with unusual silence, avoiding conversations whenever possible. His confidence had disappeared beneath the growing weight of uncertainty. Nathan noticed all of it, but none of those reactions occupied his thoughts for long. His mind remained fixed on a single realization that refused to leave him. If the kingdom accepted Emily tomorrow, it would not be because of the genealogy. The kingdom had already accepted her long before anyone discovered her birthright. That evening, the royal council assembled for an emergency session. Advisors debated legal traditions, succession laws, forgotten treaties, and historical precedents preserved inside the archives. Their voices rose and fell as each argument attempted to define who possessed the strongest legal claim. Nathan listened quietly until the discussion exhausted itself. Finally, he stood. The chamber fell silent immediately. Yesterday, he began calmly, every person in this room judged a young woman by her appearance. Today, many wish to judge her by her bloodline. Both judgments are incomplete. No one interrupted. Nathan continued, if Emily Carter had never worn that pendant, would any of us have recognized her wisdom, compassion, or dignity? Most of us did not. Several council members lowered their eyes. The genealogy may explain where she came from, Nathan said softly, but it does not explain why the people already trust her. That answer has nothing to do with ancestry. Across the kingdom, Emily remained completely unaware of the debates unfolding inside the palace. She had returned to her quiet village before sunset, believing the ceremony had simply ended as another uncomfortable memory she preferred to leave behind. The next morning, she helped repair the fence surrounding the community garden, laughed with children planting spring flowers, and delivered fresh bread to an elderly widow recovering from illness. Life continued exactly as it always had. She neither sought recognition nor imagined that royal messengers were already riding toward her village from every direction. As the first rays of morning sunlight stretched across the valley, the sound of approaching horses echoed along the winding road. Villagers looked up from their work, surprised to see royal banners fluttering in the distance. Emily slowly turned toward the road as well, unaware that for the first time in her life, the kingdom was no longer coming to judge who she appeared to be. It was coming to ask whether she would accept the place that had always belonged to her. The royal procession arrived just before noon, but it looked nothing like the grand parades that usually announced the presence of the crown. There were no musicians, no elaborate banners carried high above the road, and no ceremonial speeches prepared in advance. Nathan Ashford had ordered every unnecessary display removed because he understood that this journey was not about reminding anyone who held power. It was about acknowledging someone whose worth had existed long before the palace finally recognized it. As the riders entered the peaceful village, people paused from tending gardens, repairing fences, and gathering fresh vegetables from small family plots. Emily Carter looked up from helping two young children plant wildflower seeds beside the community schoolhouse. She brushed the soil gently from her hands and watched the royal horses approach with quiet curiosity rather than excitement. Nathan dismounted before anyone could announce his arrival. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. The villagers instinctively stepped back, creating respectful space while remaining close enough to witness whatever would happen next. Nathan looked at Emily with completely different eyes than he had only 2 days earlier. The faded blue shawl, the worn leather shoes, and the simple silver pendant were all exactly the same, yet nothing about her appeared ordinary anymore. Not because of the ancient genealogy waiting inside his satchel, but because he now understood the countless lives she had quietly changed without ever asking for recognition. Miss Carter, he said softly, his voice carrying none of the distant formality that had defined their earlier conversations, I owe you an apology. Emily tilted her head slightly, surprised by the words. Nathan continued before she could answer. I believed I understood people because I understood responsibility. I believed position revealed character. I was wrong. The valley remained completely silent except for the gentle rustling of leaves stirred by the afternoon breeze. Emily studied him for a moment before replying. Everyone sees the world through the experiences they have lived. Nathan lowered his eyes briefly. That explanation is kinder than I deserve. He slowly removed the ancient genealogy from his satchel, along with the carefully preserved records discovered inside the royal archives. There is something you need to know. Emily accepted the fragile documents with cautious hands, reading each faded page slowly while the villagers waited without interruption. As her eyes moved across the names, royal seals, and handwritten testimony, confusion gradually gave way to quiet disbelief. She touched the silver pendant resting against her neck almost instinctively. The woman who raised me, she whispered. Nathan nodded gently. She protected more than a child. She protected the future of the kingdom. Emily looked toward the distant mountains where she had spent her entire life believing she was simply another forgotten Omega. She never told me. She kept the promise entrusted to her, Nathan answered. Emily closed the genealogy carefully before returning it to him. If everything written here is true, why should it matter now? Several council members accompanying Nathan exchanged surprised glances. Most had expected excitement, perhaps even ambition. Instead, the question came from genuine humility. Nathan smiled faintly for the first time since leaving the palace. Because the people deserve to know the truth. Emily looked around the village. Children laughed while chasing butterflies through the fields. Neighbors shared baskets of fresh bread across garden fences. Elderly friends rested together beneath flowering trees. The truth should make life better, she said quietly. Not simply make one person more important. Nathan felt the weight of those words settle deeply within him. In that single moment, every lingering doubt disappeared. The ancient bloodline explained her heritage, but this conversation revealed something far greater. Emily had never desired a throne because she had already learned how to serve others without needing one. And standing beneath the warm afternoon sun surrounded by ordinary people whose lives she had quietly transformed, Nathan understood that the kingdom had finally found the leader it had been searching for long before anyone opened an ancient book. The return to Ashen Crown Palace took place beneath clear spring skies, yet nothing about that day resembled the ceremony that had first welcomed Emily Carter. Through its gates, there were no whispered judgments following her footsteps and no curious glances measuring the worth of her clothing. Instead, people lined the palace courtyard simply hoping to see the woman whose kindness had already become part of countless lives across the kingdom. Children waved excitedly from their parents' shoulders. Elderly villagers stood beside noble families without hesitation, united not by rank, but by admiration. Emily walked through the open gates, wearing the same cream-colored dress, the same faded blue shawl, and the same silver pendant resting quietly against her neck. Nathan Ashford had offered royal garments before they departed the village, but Emily had smiled gently and declined. "If the kingdom is willing to accept me," she had said softly, "it should first recognize the person it already knows." Nathan had not argued. Deep inside the Great Hall, the Royal Council assembled once more beneath the ancient banners of the Northern Territories. The elderly historian carefully presented the restored genealogy alongside every authenticated record confirming Emily's lineage. This time, no one interrupted. Even Lord Victor Hawthorne remained silent, his earlier confidence replaced by thoughtful reflection. Nathan stepped forward before the gathered court. "These records establish Emily Carter as the surviving heir of House Evermont," he said with calm certainty. "But documents alone are not the reason she stands before us today." He turned toward Emily. "Long before any of us understood her birthright, she earned the trust of our people through compassion, humility, and unwavering integrity. The truth revealed her heritage. Her life revealed her character." A quiet murmur of agreement spread through the chamber. Nathan slowly descended the final steps leading from the royal platform until he stood before Emily at eye level. Every person inside the hall watched in complete silence. Then, without hesitation, the Alpha King bowed his head respectfully before her. It was not the formal bow required by ancient protocol. It was the simple gesture of one leader honoring another human being. Emily looked genuinely surprised.
"Your
Majesty," she whispered, "please stand." Nathan lifted his eyes with a faint, sincere smile. "Today I stand because I finally understand that respect should never arrive after a title. It should begin with the person." Emily's eyes softened. She extended her hand, helping him rise, not as someone accepting superiority, but as someone choosing grace over pride. The hall erupted into heartfelt applause unlike anything the palace had heard in generations. It was not celebration for a forgotten bloodline restored. It was relief that justice had finally found its rightful place. In the months that followed, the kingdom quietly transformed. Emily accepted her role not as someone seeking privilege, but as someone determined to create opportunities for every village she had once visited alone. Schools expanded into remote communities. Healing centers welcomed families regardless of wealth. Palace traditions changed so ordinary citizens could speak directly with representatives of the crown several times each year. Nathan listened more than he spoke, remembering every lesson learned from the woman he had once failed to see. Decisions became guided not only by law but by compassion. The throne remained a symbol of leadership, yet kindness became the kingdom's greatest measure of strength. Years later, visitors often asked how such lasting peace had been achieved across the northern territories. The oldest villagers always answered with the same quiet smile. It began the day everyone stopped judging a humble Omega by what she appeared to possess and finally recognized the priceless character she had carried all along. Because crowns may inherit kingdoms, but only compassion earns the hearts that keep them standing.